On Thursday the 6th of June, a 26-year-old Navy veteran named Jarvis McIntyre had flown into San Antonio to spend some time with his family for his upcoming birthday, but shortly after arriving, he would mysteriously disappear, never to be seen alive again. 3 days after landing in Texas, he was spotted going for a run in John James Park, but little did this witness know at the time that Jarvis wasn't running for exercise, as just a few minutes earlier he had called the San Antonio police to report that he was being hunted down by a racist man with a rifle. However, after officers were sent out to the specified location, they were unable to find any trace of Jarvis, and so a missing persons report was filed shortly after. A week would then go by with the police struggling to find any leads, as despite having an eyewitness, they could not seem to identify a suspect. But after conducting another search of the park where he was last seen, a body was eventually recovered from a nearby creek, and the autopsy would reveal that the remains did in fact belong to Jarvis McIntyre. However, since this heartbreaking discovery, the police are still no closer to solving the case, and they have even stated that despite the incredibly suspicious nature of his death, they do not suspect any foul play given the conditions that his body was found in. So, given these concerning details, it is no surprise that his family have turned to the media for help, as they continue to rightfully question what really happened to Jarvis McIntyre, and more importantly, who could be responsible. Jarvis McIntyre, otherwise known as Cisco Mills, was born on the 10th of June in 1997 to his loving mother Monique Williams Tippett in the city of St. Louis, Missouri, where he grew up alongside his many siblings and cousins. Not too much is known about his younger years, but what we do know is that Jarvis would eventually enroll himself in the US Navy, where he made many friends and travelled the world, which was an experience he would always treasure. But as well as his career, he was also known to have a strong bond with his half-sisters, who he would share many moments of love and laughter with as they moved into adulthood together. But on top of this, they would also go on to act as his rock, when Jarvis made the brave decision to come out to his family, which was met with an incredibly warm welcome, especially by his mother Monique. However, at some point in the following years, the siblings would unfortunately have to go their separate ways, as some of the family decided to move out to San Antonio in Texas for reasons unknown, which meant that they would now have to travel hundreds of miles to see each other. But given their strong bond, this didn't stop Jarvis from wanting to spend time with the people he loved the most. So it was no surprise when he told his family that he was heading out to San Antonio to celebrate his 27th birthday with his half-sisters. However, little did anybody know that this trip would be the last time he would ever see his family, as shortly after arriving, Jarvis McIntyre would disappear on that fateful day in June. On Thursday the 6th of June, the 26-year-old veteran would arrive at San Antonio Airport before picking up his rented car and heading off to the Airbnb he had booked. After arriving at the property, he would then unpack and immediately call up his half-sisters to agree plans for that evening, as he wanted to make the most of his time in the state. According to his family, Jarvis then went on to spend the next few days exploring the city and enjoying the company of his distant family, as the group hadn't seen each other in quite some time. However, despite making plans to spend the whole weekend together, for an unknown reason, Jarvis decided that after having Sunday brunch with his half-sister, he wanted to spend some time alone, and was later spotted going for a walk through a local park. But what had started out as a relatively normal day would soon evolve into something much darker, as during his walk, Jarvis was intercepted by a man who was shouting racial slurs in his direction before pulling out a rifle and aiming it towards him. So, given the escalating situation, Jarvis instinctively started to run for his life, and once he managed to find himself a moment to breathe, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911 to notify them of the incident and to see if he could get some assistance. However, during the phone call, Jarvis was only able to provide the details of where he was and what was happening, as by the time the 911 dispatcher asked for his name, the phone call would abruptly cut out, and the police were left disturbed by the situation. So, given the dark nature of this phone call, the San Antonio Police Department sent officers out to the park to conduct a wellness check, as the statement involved a man with a gun, and therefore there was a high probability that a homicide could have been involved. But to everybody's shock, after arriving on the scene, the police were left puzzled as there were absolutely no signs of a struggle, and as far as they could tell, whoever had made the phone call was nowhere to be seen. So, with little evidence to go off, the police then returned to the station and opened up a case. But the missing piece of the puzzle would soon reveal itself when another phone call was made that would soon blow this mysterious case wide open. On Monday the 10th of June, the San Antonio Police Department would receive a phone call from a worried mother who was claiming that her 26-year-old son named Jarvis McIntyre had not been able to make his flight home, and that she wanted to file an official missing persons report. At the time, the police initially didn't express too much concern, given that Jarvis was a 26-year-old Navy veteran and therefore would more than likely be able to look after himself. But failing to join up the dots, the police were completely unaware that this missing person case was in any way associated with the phone call they had received the previous day. So they simply told Monique not to worry and that they would locate her son. However, after the police began sharing Jarvis's picture, they would start to receive tips from the local community claiming to have seen somebody matching Jarvis's description on Sunday at the John James Park, which coincidentally happened to be the very same park that the unidentifiable phone call was made from. So, after another witness came forward to say that they saw a man with a rifle running in the same direction as somebody who looked just like Jarvis, the police then experienced a harrowing moment of realization, as it became clear that the man who had made the phone call that day was the very same man who had been reported as missing. So, after confirming this disturbing discovery, the police then escalated the case from a missing person investigation to a potential homicide, and officers were sent out to meticulously search the park for clues that would reveal what happened to Jarvis. However, to their dismay, after a week of intense searching, they were still unable to find any evidence of a homicide, and Jarvis remained a missing person, with the family's grief ever increasing as the days passed by. But what would happen next would break the hearts of the entire community, when another grim discovery was made that would confirm what many people already knew. On Friday the 14th of June, around a week after the initial disappearance, the police would decide to conduct another search of John James Park, with the hope of finding some more evidence that may have led them to locating the missing young man. Several officers were sent out alongside canine units to aid in the search, but as the day progressed, it seemed like they were unable to find any more clues, and they began to fear that another unsuccessful day was about to go by. So, in response to their lack of leads, the police then decided to move their search to the neighbouring area of Salado Creek Greenway, and soon after arriving on the scene, a heartbreaking discovery was made. Lying face down in the creek bed was the decomposing body of an African-American male in his 20s, with no shoes on his feet and no belongings other than the clothes on his back. So, without a way of officially identifying the body, the officers eventually retrieved the remains and sent them off for an autopsy, as based on the scene there was no other way of determining any cause of death. But soon after completing the post-mortem examination and identifying the body as belonging to Jarvis, a statement would be made by the police which revealed how they believed no foul play was involved, despite the extremely concerning details that accompanied his disappearance. However, refusing to give up on their loved one, the McIntyre family pushed back and demanded that the police continue their investigation into the case, to which they eventually agreed, and it wouldn't be long before the next piece of suspicious evidence would soon rise to the surface, when Jarvis's rented vehicle was found less than a mile away from his body, which contained all of the missing items from the scene. So, with nowhere else to turn, the police then conducted a press conference where they once again asked the public for help in their investigation, but despite many more tips coming through and further evidence being revealed, to this day, Jarvis McIntyre's case remains unsolved. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But Jarvis's family are continuing to spread awareness about the case by sharing the story with local media outlets, in the hopes that somebody can come forward with the evidence that they need. The San Antonio Police Department have also come out to say that they are now treating the case as a potential homicide investigation, meaning they do not yet have inexplicable proof that Jarvis was murdered, given the conditions of his body, but they are certainly open to the possibility. So based on this, it will hopefully only be a matter of time before the truth will reveal itself, and the McIntyre family will get the closure they so desperately need. However, given that it has now been over a month since Jarvis was found deceased, alongside the disturbing details of how he initially disappeared, I can't help but feel that the likelihood of his case getting solved is only growing weaker as the days pass. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, then you will likely know that usually at this time in the video I will begin reeling off all of the possible theories that could explain what might have happened to Jarvis that day. But given the details of this case, there is very little doubt in my mind that Jarvis was the victim of a hate crime, and therefore, I won't waste your time theorizing any other far-fetched possibilities. But keeping with the theme of my channel, I do believe there are several possible suspects and also a number of reasons why Jarvis may have been selected as a victim, especially given some of the other cases that I've covered in the past. So with this in mind, the first question to ask here is, why was Jarvis McIntyre selected to be a victim that day? Well, firstly, he was a proud gay man that was not afraid to speak his truth when it came to the rights of the LGBT community. So given the fact that he was walking alone in the park that day, perhaps somebody decided to take his life as a means of acting out on their sadistic beliefs. After all, this certainly wouldn't be the first time an outwardly gay man was murdered over his sexuality, and there have also been countless examples of other gay men going missing in recent years that to this day have still not been found. An example that comes to mind would be Stephen Edwards, who was another gay man of colour that disappeared in New York last year, who remains missing to this day. But perhaps an even better example would be Jared Shadid, who just like Jarvis had been travelling alone around the time he disappeared and was also staying at an Airbnb in a bad part of town. So given these examples, it certainly wouldn't surprise me if Jarvis was killed over his sexuality. But another variable that also may have played a key role in this tragic story is that Jarvis was a person of colour, and was staying in a state known for its issues with racism. But before I go any further with this theory, I must say that racism can be found all over the world, so although I do think it's very possible that Jarvis was profiled by a racist murderer, especially given the fact that he called the police claiming to be chased by a man with a gun shouting racial slurs, this doesn't mean that we can just automatically rule San Antonio as a sundown town. However, there are several other parts of Texas that have been more accurately depicted as areas black people should stay clear of, such as the town of Vida, which became famous after a black delivery driver recounted his experience driving through the town, where he was warned by a local to leave before the sun went down, as even the police were unlikely to offer him any protection. But as scary as this story is, no hard evidence was ever provided, which unfortunately makes it impossible to verify. However, for the purposes of providing context, there is one other victim that comes to mind that you may be familiar with that shares some eerily similar details to Jarvis McIntyre, but unlike the previous story, the evidence of racism is all too clear. On Saturday the 1st of October, almost 2 years ago, a 25-year-old man from Mississippi named Rasheem Carter would call his mother in a panic, claiming that he was being followed by a group of men in trucks who were shouting racial slurs in his direction. So, fearing for her child's life, she immediately advised him to head over to the nearest police station to report the incident and to ask for a lift home. However, in response to his pleas, the Taylorsville Police Department claimed that they were not a taxi service and that because his home was out of their jurisdiction, there was nothing they could do. So with no other options, Rasheem then called a family friend to pick him up from a gas station in Taylorsville, to which she agreed. However, after arriving on the scene, Rasheem was mysteriously nowhere to be found, eventually leading his mother to file a missing persons report. But unfortunately, there would be no updates to the case until a month later, when the skeletal remains of Rasheem Carter were found, with his head separated from his body. However, despite these incredibly controversial details, to this day the case remains an open investigation, with the police strongly believing that nobody else was involved and that his death was nothing more than an accident. So, given the fact that this case is now almost 2 years old, I can't help but worry that Jarvis McIntyre may also never receive the justice he deserves, as the details are far too similar to be a coincidence in my opinion. But unlike the case of Rasheem Carter, the police are still actively investigating the case. So as long as we continue to share his story, it may only be a matter of time before we solve the case, meaning that Jarvis McIntyre's family can finally receive the closure they need. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any other theories of your own which you think may help explain what really happened to Jarvis McIntyre, please leave your ideas in the comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you would like to hear more about some of the other cases that I featured in this video, such as Jared Shadid or Stephen Edwards, please feel free to check out the videos on screen now.